Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our special presentation on trolls, doxing, and threats, guidance for clergy and congregations engaged in prophetic ministry. My name is Leah Schade, and I am one of the co-founders of the Clergy Emergency League, which is a network of clergy throughout the United States that are helping to support and equip pastors for ministering during this very divisive time in our country's history. And our session today is going to give you some information and guidance for how to deal with the kind of pushback that can come from bad actors in our society, whether it's online trolls or doxing, which is the sharing of people's personal information online without their consent, threats to churches and houses of worship. All of these things have been on the rise over the last several years. We've seen a number of hate groups and domestic terrorists that are attacking clergy and congregations. And they're doing this to intimidate, silence, and even perpetrate violence against them. So we want to provide some different voices and perspectives on how your congregation can prepare for this and to deal with it if it, hopefully it doesn't happen, but if it does, that you know the steps to take. So we have a number of guests with us this evening who are going to give us some of that guidance, and we'll be introducing them in just a minute. But I do want to invite everyone to put their name and your location and your congregation into the chat, and whatever your role is in the congregation. You can also put your questions to our panelists into the chat, or you can use the Q&A. I also want to recognize the Wisconsin Council of Churches, which is co-hosting this session with us. They have provided incredible resources for clergy, not just in Wisconsin, but throughout the United States. And they are our partner organization for this event and many events. So we are grateful for their support in this. I also want to recognize one of our steering committee members from the Clergy Emergency League, Lavinia Pearson, who is going to begin our session with a time of prayer.
Thank you, Leah. From the psalmist, from Psalm 27, David writes, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When evildoers assail me to devour my flesh, my adversaries and foes, they shall stumble and fall." And then he concludes with these words, "I believe that I shall see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong. Let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord." Gracious and loving God, we pray for courage and clarity and patience as we navigate challenges to our ministries and in our communities. God, our discussion today, that we may learn from one another to be peacemakers, be with the presenters, and guide them with the things that we need to hear, and be with our communities in the days to come. And we pray this in the name of the God who commands us to love one another. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Lavinia. Now I would like to introduce to you our co-moderator for this evening. Her name is Reverend Cathy Christmon, and she is a United Methodist elder serving in the Wisconsin Annual Conference. She's been a pastor at Baraboo First UMC, located in rural South Central Wisconsin, since 2022. Prior to that, she served in congregations in Michigan and Ohio, and her current congregation became a reconciling church in 2019. They recently partnered with a local UCC congregation to host an ecumenical Pride worship service at the local theater as part of the county's Pride Fest weekend. She also serves on the board of Queers and Allies, a local LGBTQIA+ support group that serves as a resource for all persons in her region in Wisconsin. So, Cathy, welcome, and you have a personal interest in what we're going to be talking about this evening. Can you tell us a little about your experience with protesters at your church and at the Pride event?
Yeah, thank you, Leah, for the opportunity. And so Baraboo First, as you shared, has been a reconciling congregation for a few years now. Long history of ministry with persons on the fringes, who we might say the least among us. And in July of this past year, we held a sermon series called Christmas in July. Had an amazing worship service about love, and as we left worship, we were greeted with 3 protesters outside of our building. As my people left the building, feeling the high of the service, they were faced with hate and hurt. The protesters were known in the area as targeting the institutional church, and specifically congregations that supported female clergy and LGBTQIA+ persons. This was not a violent experience, but their words were painful, scary. I was called the devil multiple times. My elderly congregation members were berated for not being right with God, as they were close to death. My trans members were afraid and waited for the police to arrive before they left the building. Painful, scary. We were not prepared. My priority became the safety of my people, and I had trusted colleagues who attempted to interact with the protesters, and they received equal hate. There are videos out there, and videos from the local UCC congregation as well, and we further participated in other events and had to quickly scramble to protect and plan for protests that did occur. So this was a traumatic event.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Cathy, I can only imagine what the fear that enveloped the church in a moment that should have been, but that was joyous and celebratory of the children of God. And so I appreciate your being here, and I know you're going to have a lot of good questions for our panelists today. So let me introduce to you our first panelist. Her name is the Reverend Lauren GRUBAUGH Thomas, and she is an Episcopal priest in Littleton, Colorado. She is a nurturer of faithful dissidents, and she empowers communities to embrace the sacred art of nonviolent social change. She is an Episcopal priest imagining local church ministry and a community organizer committed to building safety through belonging. And she also is a writer and a podcaster on her website, which is a Soulful Revolution. She is a 2022 Trinity Leadership Fellow and a certified Kaleidoscope Institute Dialogue Facilitator. She holds a Master of Divinity with an emphasis in Christian ethics from Fuller Theological Seminary. So, Lauren, welcome. And you have had a rather difficult experience with doxing. And can you tell us a little bit about what that was like for you?
Of course, and thank you for having me in this conversation. This experience of gathering stories like this is so important because the isolation of a doxing experience is the intention. So I discovered in December of 2021 that I had been doxed. An alt-right website had described me as Antifa and cataloged me alongside hundreds of other people. And they had gathered photographs from not only my professional life, but also my personal life, including my wedding and a photograph that included my husband as well. And the site detailed the town and the county where I live and included links to blogs, to sermons, and other materials that I've produced over the years. And the commentary that accompanied these things was demeaning, it was sexist, it depicted me as a threat. And while all the information that was on the website was publicly accessible for those who went and dug through the website of the church that I was serving at the time, or through the archives of the blogs that I had written, or on my social media, the more public-facing aspect of my social media, I was alarmed by the way that all of this information had been collated. And there was a significant amount of information that was used to shape a narrative about my being Antifa. The featured sermons and blogs dealt with racial justice, LGBTQ justice, and gun violence prevention. And I suspect, though I can't prove, that I was likely first identified as a person of interest to this alt-right group because of a blog that I wrote back in 2017 when I was part of the counter-protest to the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, and showed up there as a seminarian. The blog had gone somewhat viral back in 2017, and I received a number of hateful comments on that blog at the time, but never anything as sinister as being on a roll call of people considered worthy of surveillance. I had my antenna up for some time following the discovery of the page, and I had no way of knowing how long it had been active. And so given that this page was on an independent website as opposed to social media, I had no way of knowing, or rather, I had no third-party authority to appeal to have it taken down. I live in the most conservative county in the Denver metro area, and in this place, hate groups are a known quantity, and there have been high tensions for the last few years in the midst of the pandemic. Our school board was recently overtaken by a group that is intent on disrupting work toward diversity, equity, and inclusion. And my family lives in this context. My husband is Indian American. We have twin daughters who at the time were less than a year old. And I found myself really concerned for their safety in particular. So I want to offer 3 takeaways from my experience about how to build a community of support before and after being doxxed. The first is to remember that you're not alone. And that's why I think experiences like this are so crucial, to gather together and tell these stories. I was not the only one to have had an experience like this. And in the immediate aftermath of discovering the page, I reached out to mentors and colleagues who had experienced similar things. And a number of colleagues within the Clergy Emergency League were people that I was able to process this experience with. They were able to lament with me over the feelings of insecurity that this experience produced, and also encourage me that this was a validation that I was doing faithful and courageous work in the world, which holding that tension. And I needed to hear both of those things. The Clergy Emergency League was an important source of support and camaraderie in the most acute anxiety of that experience, and was a means of helping me think long-term about well-being, my own, my family's, and my communities, and also strategizing about how to continue to faithfully live into the call to prophetic ministry. The second takeaway is to own your narrative. I was encouraged and did alert my rector of the church I was serving and the bishop under whose authority I serve of what had taken place, because it was important to me that I be able to cast the narrative, to own the narrative of what this was about. That it was alignment of my reputation and not because of anything I had done that was that I oughtn't to have done. And it was also important to me to take the lead so that if there were members of my community who learned about this webpage and saw it, that they be aware of who I am and what I stand for, and that I be able to be in control of that narrative. So the congregation was not informed, but the rector was aware. So she and I were able to work together to have a plan in place. And then finally, build safety through belonging in your neighborhood. I live in a neighborhood where I've spent about 2 years. And during the time that we've lived in this neighborhood, which is in a new development where people are eager to build community, my husband and I, about 1.5 years ago, walked our neighborhood and invited all of our neighbors to a block party, and almost all of them showed up. And that catalyzed incredible connection in this community and built trust with our neighbors. And so a few months ago, when somebody who was a member of the Oath Keepers anti-government group moved into our neighborhood with all of the sundry apparel and bumper stickers representing that political persuasion, my neighbors were the first to text me and say, hey, we're aware that this individual is in the neighborhood. Let's all be mindful of any potential security concerns in terms of this person. So I feel a lot of safety in my neighborhood, knowing that my neighbors are looking out for not only for me and for my children, but for a sense of inclusion and safety through belonging in our neck of the woods.
Lauren, wow, that is incredible. The fact that you've processed through this to the point where you have these really good and helpful suggestions for others, this is gold, really. Thank you so much. I know Cathy has a follow-up question for you.
Can you speak more to how this affected you personally and faithfully?
I spent about 2 days deeply scared. I mean, very, very, very anxious about this. My husband was also really frightened about what the potential safety impact would be for our family. And so, yeah, initially my response was anxiety and being really concerned about, in the execution of my ministry, should I be peeling back? Should I be cautious, more cautious about what I say in terms of any social issues, and especially those that had been highlighted on this page. And in the long term, that wasn't the tact I took, but that was certainly, it provoked the initial response that was wanted, which was to make me afraid and to dial back my sense of urgency about proclaiming the gospel and having the gospel be in conversation with injustice in the world and how to be people of peace and justice. And I should say the anxiety piece of it too, therapy was invaluable. So I called up my therapist pretty immediately. And that was a conversation that she and I had to work through. Like, are you in immediate danger? And to be able to assess the danger level and to determine at this point, this page may have been out there for the last 4 years. And so being able to assess, okay, this is probably not an instance of acute danger. And what are some of the things I could be mindful of in my neighborhood? Like if I see strangers, what do I do? If there's going to be people who are in our private space. So it was really pragmatic and in terms of the emotional response, as well as like, what do I have to be aware of in terms of security, and then in terms of communicating who I am and not allowing this to malign my reputation in ways that would be damaging in the long term.
And was there any possibility for you to get your name off of that list?
No, nothing that would have been done with any kind of ease. I did have a conversation with folks at the Southern Poverty Law Center, and with something like this, there's very little control. I mean, this is it's on the internet, right? So that's the challenge of having these private websites that are essentially creating roll calls of people that they think are problematic. It's not very simple. And what I was also told is one of these could easily just pop up again. It's like smacking the gophers. So that would have been, even if I was able to get that website taken down by reporting it to, I don't know, to the US government in some form, it would have just popped up again in a new form.
Yeah. Well, Lauren, thank you so much. And we'll come back to you with further questions. But now we're going to shift to Reverend Bill KNEZOVICH, who is the pastor, a pastor in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. He has been serving for 32 years and is right now at our Saviour's Lutheran Church in Fresno, California. Throughout his entire pastorate, Bill has been deeply involved in community organizing through the PICO network, and he has committed his life to giving voice to the voiceless, demanding justice for the marginalized and for the forgotten. He has served as the president of Faith in Community in Fresno and served on the board for the Lutheran Office of Public Policy and Lutheran Campus Ministry. One of the greatest honors Bill has ever received was to be the Grand Marshal for the Fresno Pride Parade and Festival in 2018, the largest pride celebration in Central California. But Bill has his own story to tell about the ways in which he and his congregation have been targeted by right-wing extremists. So Bill, please tell us about what happened in your case.
Well, thank you. Actually, we've never met in person. We were actually supposed to meet in person, if you remember, at Pastor Nelson's church. But then the day before, the Proud Boys showed up because we had a lot of our church members of my congregation and plus friends of the congregation wanted to do a family-friendly drag show. And you know, we have allowed our facility to be used for years by the LGBTQ community, from everything from Transgender Day of Visibility to, you name it, fundraisers for the LGBTQ community, including the Pride Parade Festival. And the week before that happened, this was December 10th, we started getting all these voicemails. And they were disgusting, you know, and threatening. Actually, the FBI is looking into them, and I think the FBI has identified some of these folks. But they showed up in mass, the Proud Boys, on December 10th, and tried to shut it down. Fortunately, the police were there. Our police department, you know, is kind of a mixed bag within the LGBTQ community as far as their thoughts about it, because there have been Proud Boys who have been members of the police department, but I guess once they've been found out, they were removed. But there's a sympathy there because we are in one of the most conservative areas of California. So, but they did promise that they were going to leave us a Christmas present, and we had to cancel a lot of events after that event because we were afraid of people getting hurt. And then in April of this year, they broke out most of all the windows in our social hall and the windows in our classroom and office wing to the tune of $45,000 that we had to get fixed. And they left their sticker, and the sticker was the Central California Proud Boys. And it was posted on one of the, they had put it on one of the guardrails at the church. Plus, it was the death threats and all that, you know, the pastor needs to go. And for quite a while, you know, I've always been at the forefront of rights, trying to make sure, like our school board, because we had a president who was very anti-LGBTQ, and, you know, I went and stood up to him. And so, you know, I've been marked, I know that, but then my spouse is also marked. And so, you know, we're always looking over our shoulders anymore. I just spoke to the FBI yesterday, and they have still no leads on who broke the windows. They do have leads on some of the people who left some of the threatening voicemails, so we'll see about that. But we've been really involved. One of the fortunate things about Fresno, even though we're conservative, is that we work very closely. I work very closely with allied clergy, and especially Rabbi Rick from Temple Beth Israel, who, especially now, has been regularly attacked. Even their windows broken like our windows were broken. But the police actually caught who broke their windows. So, but we do have a lot of allies, and that makes us feel better, because I think, as Reverend Lauren was saying, is their aim is to isolate and alienate. And the initial attacks, even, they were trying to go to our neighbors to get them involved in protesting against us too. But our neighbors, I understand one of our neighbors even came out with a shotgun and said, "Get the hell off my lawn." So, and this guy, he doesn't agree with our theology. As a matter of fact, he even had a vote for Trump thing on his truck, but he loves the church and he loves what we do in the neighborhood. So I would say that in the end, again, getting back to something that Reverend Lauren said, was power from the community organizing point of view. Power is in the relationship. We have good relationships with our neighbors, pretty good relationship with the police department, better relationship with the FBI, and we've been involved in some roundtables that our Attorney General for California has been doing around hate crimes in California, because they're very much on the rise. So, and in September, we got a bomb threat. We had to evacuate. We didn't get it, the police got it, but they came and evacuated the church, which generated from Nigeria. And I thought, okay, from Nigeria, no problem. But then the FBI agent said, well, that's not the issue. They had so much detailed information on the church, and he didn't share with me what was in it, but that they have their own little organizations, and they know that if they send it from the United States, the FBI will find them, so they get their friends in Nigeria to send them. And this is not only us. This happened with the school district in Davis, California, too. So, you know, they're pretty smart at how not to get caught.
Wow, Bill. Oh my gosh. That's so frightening. And yet here you are, here's your congregation still continuing to do the work. This is incredible. Cathy, please, a follow-up question for Bill.
Bill, you hinted at this a little bit, but can you speak a little bit more to the safety, personal safety, congregational safety, and even community safety? It sounds like, being a very community grounded congregation, that's a priority even for your neighbors.
Right. Yeah. So just this last week, we got a call from do we want to do the drag event again, the family friendly drag event? And the issue was, yeah, we would like to do it, but the issues are people going to be safe? And we've had to, quite frankly, we don't publish a lot of the things we do anymore on Facebook or anything, because we know they're looking at them. So it's kind of like, I feel like the early Christians, you know, drawing the fish in the sand, so to speak, getting the word out when we have events, because well, I'll give you an example. After the December 10th event, we were to do a Christmas fundraiser for the Pride Parade and Festival, and the police even said, well, you know, it's a night event, and we can't guarantee that there wouldn't be a sniper. We can't guarantee that everybody be safe, because of course it's a night, and you know, I understand that. So we have been impacted, but we're trying our best to figure out how to get around this, so that you know, we can continue to provide a safe place. Transamotion, which is housed in our church, at the round table with the governor's attorney general, they even said, you know, we used to feel so safe at our Saviour's. Our Saviour's was a safe space, and now we don't. And so right now we're trying to figure out, you know, we're getting cameras, and there's a grant that we're applying for through the state to try to fence in the yard. And that's sad to me, because so many, you know, we're in a desert in at our Savior's, a food desert, economic desert. So many of the people around the church are poor, and our space, our courtyard, is kind of a park space for the whole neighborhood. And now we're going to have to, close it off. And plus, even choir members, we have a choir loft. They were saying, well, what are we going to do if one of these lone actors comes in and starts shooting up the church? So we have bear spray, we have wasp spray in the church. I mean, pragmatic things. We let everybody know, and in case of an event, these are the doors you go out. These are the doors you don't go out. So, I mean, and we also have a rule now. No one is at the church alone. Everybody, we have to have 2 or more people there because, these guys, well, they're no different than Hamas as far as I'm concerned. They have hatred in their heart. They only want one aim, and that aim is to get rid of us. And I know that, and our people know that, especially since my congregation is over 50% LGBTQIA+. It's a sad day to live in America at this point.
Mm. And Bill, how has this affected your worship attendance or even your membership? Have people stayed? Have they left? Have they been drawn to it because of your courage? Have they been saying, I can't do this anymore? What has been the effect on the congregation?
Well, I think the last one, people are drawn to it. They want to support a congregation that's standing up for the rights of people. And this is not just LGBTQ that our Savior stands up for. We were also attacked for Black Lives Matter. So, it goes hand in hand. It's when we had our vigil after the attack on our church, it was our motto was a violence against one is a violence against all. Mm. And we do know, and I keep emphasizing it, we can't become like them. I think of Martin Luther King Jr.'s statement, don't let anyone drag you so low as to hate them, because you become them. But at the same time, I realized that we need to figure out how these people need to be held accountable. And fortunately, like I said, we have a lot of networking, especially among the LGBTQ community, but also among the interfaith community here that are progressive. So, we feel supported. Like on December 10th, I had 14 pastors, rabbis, imams, even Islam, that were at our Savior's to be a barrier between us and the Proud Boys. So,
wow.
Again, it's back to the powers in the relationship. And we know that if one of us goes down, we all go down. That's just the reality.
Mm. Well, that is inspiring courage in the face of incredible evil. And I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story with us, Bill.
Well, thank you for allowing me to be on and to share it.
Yes. We are now going to invite to talk with us PARDEEP KALEKA, who is the co-director of Not in Our Town, which specializes in community hate prevention and de-radicalization specialists with Parents for Peace, which assists families and individuals entrenched in extremism as an off-ramp from hateful ideologies. And the reason that PARDEEP got into this is because he had a direct and horrific experience in his house of worship. PARDEEP, thank you for joining us. And can you tell us what happened at your temple?
Sure. Thank you so much, Reverend Leah, and thank you for just everyone on this call. I feel like sometimes Jim, maybe you are not a lay person anymore, but I feel like I'm still a lay person, and I get to represent my faith and the courage that we all have in standing up to hate. And I think, everybody kind of spoke about this of, I think that this prevention work is going to happen at the speed of relationships. But it also happens at the way, and in this at the level of compassion of response, right? So when things happen to us, horrific things, tragic things, we could turn inward. We could kind of subscribe to that fear that we all feel. It was natural, but the courage that you all showed is the same thing that I think that our community wanted to show as well. On August 5th, 2012, a white supremacist gunman murdered 7 people at the Sikh temple, Wisconsin, and then took his own life. And while that happened to us, we were not defined by what happened to us. And it took, this was one of the deadliest hate crimes committed in a place of worship in nearly 50 years. But it took a near Herculean effort by not just the Sikh community, but the interfaith faith community, the ecumenical community, the law enforcement community, civic society, people, neighbors, teachers, educators, schools, you name it, and people were showing up. The LGBTQ community, everybody that day, that Sunday, had a choice, and the choice that many people made was to show up and to continue to show up, and that is hopefully the call that we have today. Not in our town, was formed after a hate incident in Billings, Montana, where there was a growing sort of white nationalist group that was intimidating the neighborhood there. And this is a small town America. A Jewish family was especially targeted when white supremacists threw a rock into a house, and it landed on the bed of a child. And that rock, once it landed there, the neighbors in the community knew that this was going too far. This intimidation was going too far. And in response, there was a call for everyone in the community to put a menorah on their windows to signify solidity, signify solidarity, but to also say, we're all in this together. And when something happens to one person in the community, it happens to all of us. And so that's what Not in Our Town was encouraging at that time, and then over the years has documented not just what happens to the community, but the response that the community has. And within what happened at the Sikh temple, obviously this was motivated by hate, but it took a very because of the way that we understand hate and hate crimes. When we understand hate crimes, we know that just not like 7 people weren't the targets of it. We know that the entire community was a target of that hate crime. 4/6, not just in America, but all over the world. This was our sort of like post 9/11, right? We had people from all over the world saying, hey, like, what is going on over there? Do they hate us that bad? And I know that this is not what this is not the America that I grew up in. So as you all were saying, these are political terrorists. They're not, they're trying to achieve a political motive. They're attempting to disrupt democracy, disrupt elections. They're using intimidation tactics. This should not be called militia groups. They should not be called patriots. We should not euphemize any of them. These are people who are political terrorists, and they're acting out of fear. And that fear is inclusion of voice, inclusion of diverse voices, inclusion of women voices, inclusion of people who don't typically have a voice, and for us to stand up to them. And I see my friend, former U.S. Attorney James Santelle, on this call, and there was no one more courageous than Jim in the aftermath of this hate crime that happened at the Sikh temple of Wisconsin. He was the first to clearly articulate that this was in fact a hate crime. And he'll tell you that there was nobody to prosecute in this. There was no investigation really needed to be done. The shooter shot and killed himself. But at that time, 6 were one of the groups that was not targeted or was not counted on the UCR FBI hate crime reports. And being counted on those reports doesn't just mean having a number and being able to tick it off and say this many hate crimes happened to the Sikh community, but it really means, how do we allocate resources? How do we see an uptick in the surge of this particular community and that particular community? And now what we're seeing is Sikhs, year after year after year, are some of the most disproportionately targeted top 5 groups in the United States year after year. We did not even know that when August 5th, 2012 happened, of how much Sikhs were targeted. We sort of had evidence as post 9/11 sort of backlash, increased the hate crimes against Muslims, against Sikhs, and against people who were deemed different in sort of the social fabric of America. But to not, and this, the sort of like this hate crime was a person who was a full-fledged hammer-skin skinhead who was, he was on the radar for who you name it. You name the advocacy group, the SPLC, the ADL, the FBI, everybody knew this was a hate crime, but could not call it out, right? And I think that's something that we need to get better at as we go forward. Of if there's a rise in Christian nationalism, call it out, right? And we can't be the ones to call it out. I, as a Sikh, cannot call it out in the Christian community and say, hey, like there's a rise in Christian nationalism, and here's where they're targeting, and here's the elections that they're targeting, and here's how they get online and they take tutorials and they know what they can get away with for First Amendment rights, right? And how far they can take this, but also escalate violence of somebody else who may be unhinged, right? That is the responsibility of other people in different communities. Now, I will help and Jim will help, but this needs to be something that's addressed from within the Christian community. Right now, statistically speaking, right, 1 out of every 4 people believes that the United States should be a Christian-only country. Now, the good news with that is 3 out of 4, right? This is according to a Brookings Institute survey. 6,000 people were surveyed. 40% of those people also, thought that Christian ideals should govern this country, right? So there is a rise in all of this, and it's happening, and it's harming people. And so, with that said, we all just need to heed the response, and every time something like this happens, overwhelm it to the point that people don't want to do this anymore. I remind people of the shooter's name all the time. Media should not glamorize this, but I, as sort of a victim in this, want to say, hey, you know what? Here's who did it, and here's how they failed miserably, and here's how community stepped up. And I have not heard Wade Michael Page's name mentioned in a manifesto. Part of that is because now the Sikh community in southeastern Wisconsin, while he wanted to intimidate us, has grown into the thousands, right? So Jim is an honorary Sikh. He comes to the temple when there's no cameras on, when there's no headline or nothing to be said. He just comes and he prays with us. And that's the kind of community that grows out of this hate. But we really need to be deliberate in the work that we do, and just lean on our faiths when we feel that fear.
Oh, Pardeep, first of all, just continued prayers for your community. It doesn't matter how many years it's been, that kind of trauma stays with the community for a long, long time. And the work that you have done to try to bring healing, to bring awareness, it just speaks to your own courage and the courage of your community. So thank you very, very much for that. And we're going to go right to Jim, because the way that the two of you have partnered in this, I want to bring up Jim next. So Jim Santelle is a former United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Wisconsin and the Western District of Michigan and in Washington, D.C., and also served in the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad in Iraq. And Jim, we are so grateful for your being able to take the time to be here with us. You've heard these stories, you've worked with PARDEEP. Can you talk to us a little bit about what it was like for you to work with his community and also with the larger community in which they were embedded?
Leah and colleagues, my good friend PARDEEP, what an honor it is, a professional honor to be with you tonight, a personal delight as well to join you and all the members, not only of the Wisconsin Council of Churches, but beyond, in talking about this very important topic. I remember the Sunday very well. I was serving as the U.S. Attorney on August 5th of 2012. I happened to be in the office in downtown Milwaukee, which is not unusual for any of you, obviously, on a Sunday morning, but also for people in government when I received the call that there had been a shooting at the Sikh Gurdwara in Oak Creek. I will tell you, as I've told PARDEEP and told members of his family and the larger congregation, that to this day I'm embarrassed that while I knew that there was a Sikh Gurdwara temple there, I had never set foot in the temple before. And I'm going to come back to that in terms of practical things that government can and should do in anticipation of these kinds of horrific acts. But as PARDEEP, my great friend and colleague and partner in all of this, has said, truly partnering in those moments immediately after the shooting in a number of different ways. And I so much appreciate the opportunity to talk with you tonight about what happened on that day, and most importantly, the days afterwards. I need also at this point to identify a particular factual element of this that makes it especially significant for PARDEEP to be with us tonight, and that is that among the 7 people that he identified as being taken, lost in that, many others injured, both physically and also, of course, psychologically, scars that continue to this day, more than 11 years later. Among the people taken on that day was PARDEEP's father, Satwan Kaleka. And so he is not only a victim survivor, but also inspired in the struggle, as PARDEEP has said, against the voices and the powers of hate that are in this community. There is very good reason, based upon the inquiry and the work that the FBI did in the wake of this, to believe not only was there a struggle among many people following that day, but Satwan Kaleka, a true hero in his death, almost certainly struggled with the shooter that day and prevented more deaths and more injuries on that day. And so I always, whenever I see PARDEEP and his wonderful family, shed a tear for their own personal loss, but also get wildly inspired, as we all should, by the courage of his father, not only in creating this wonderful place of worship, the Gurdwara there, inviting people of all faiths there, not only of the Sikh community, but also quite literally a sign of the struggle that all members of every faith need to continue in this country, so that we can address, in the way that Satwan did on that morning, the voices and the powers of hate. I want to spend a little bit of time talking again at your invitation, Leah, and PARDEEP's as well, about the 3 things that I think are important to take away from this, that I have taken away. And yes, it has been, I will tell you, not only a professional endeavor at that time to become a part of the community, and I am so proud to this day, I will get emotional as I talk about it, that as PARDEEP said, I continue to be, I believe, a member of his family, a member of the Sikh community. I was there 2 weeks ago on Sunday, and doing that continuing work, which I will get back to, an expectation that all of you should have, not only of government people, but of people generally in the community, rightly had. I want to talk about 3 things in particular. When these events happen, whether the kinds of things that Reverend Lauren describes or Reverend Bill describes, PARDEEP described also, it is appropriate to call upon law enforcement. And both Bill and Lauren and PARDEEP obviously indicating reaching out to the FBI, reaching out to local law enforcement. Call the law enforcement, call your local law enforcement authorities immediately. If you have an inkling of any kind, certainly if it's a letter, if it is a note, if there is something whispered to you through a congregation member that they have heard about something, it is of primary importance to call law enforcement, even if you conclude in your own sense of judgment and awareness of a community that there may not be a real threat. You need to make that phone call. You need to pick up the phone. You need to be engaged with local law enforcement. That is the responsibility that they have in service to you as members of the religious communities in your areas. They are obliged to respond, not only in the ways, of course, that they've responded in Oak Creek and many other places around the nation. That's their responsibility. And so the first thing I would say is reach out. And second, to the extent as we did, as Pardeep said, no one here to prosecute. Undeniably, a hate crime occurred on August 5th. On that day, we did not have a defendant to prosecute. I would have authorized an indictment of the shooter for that hate crime. And I would have tried that case in the federal district court in the Eastern District of Wisconsin had he lived. We would have prosecuted him and seen him sentenced to imprisonment in the federal courts for doing just that. And we've seen that around the country as well. But a part of that also is to do what I'm going to call the inquiry, because right, Pardeep is absolutely right. We didn't have to do a criminal investigation, but we did do an inquiry of what happened. And it would offer, by way of lessons learned by me and others, that it's hugely important, whatever happens, whether it is perceived to you to be benign or results in the kind of tragedy that we saw and continue to experience in even the wake 11 years later of what happened at the GRUBAUGH in Oak Creek, is very important to communicate with a congregation about what happened. And I'm very proud to say that with Pardeep's and his family's involvement, the involvement of the FBI, we spent a lot of time after that happened, not only doing the inquiry, figuring out who this fellow was. Did he act alone? Did he act in concert with others? What animated him? And yes, as Pardeep has indicated, he was truly one of these cocktails of a human being of who has been shoved aside appropriately by his family, his personal relationships, by the U.S. military, by the very hate crimes group that he affiliated with. They no longer had anything to do with him for a variety of reasons. We defined that and explained that to the congregation. We talked about what happened on that morning, and we explained in great detail what the inquiry had found. That is a huge, important piece of the healing process for a community and certainly for the congregation as well. And so I recommend that to you strongly. Expect that from law enforcement. Whatever happens, that they have an obligation not only to make those kinds of inquiries, yes, investigate, yes, prosecute in the appropriate circumstances, but also to communicate with you. And maybe not always right away. Investigations and inquiries of this sort take a long time, but there's an obligation to get back to the congregation and talk about what happened in the community. Expect that as well. Second, a major piece of what I was so proud to work with Pardeep on, the leadership of the GRUBAUGH and the community generally, the reach out to the community and certainly to the victim families. We like to refer to them rather as survivors, and Pardeep and his family are among that group. I will tell you a brief story that I tell with great delight. We were all honored to have Eric Holder, the former Attorney General at that point, my boss, come to Oak Creek, be a part of the memorial service at the Oak Creek High School in commemoration of the lives lost and the tragedy, the hate crime there. He spoke there, spoke in other occasions afterwards. Incredibly important for Eric Holder, the Chief Federal Law Enforcement Officer of the United States of America. And yes, secondarily, I will say modestly, me, the Chief Federal Law Enforcement Officer for this district, to meet with the families. And Pardeep, you recall well that we adjourned to a chemistry room just adjacent to the place where your father and 6 other people were laying in memory of their lives. And on that day, Eric Holder and all of us talked to the families. You have an obligation, you have an expectation that that obligation would be met. During the course of that discussion, one of the members of the families, there are about 40 people altogether who had been affected, immediate families affected by this. One of them raised a concern that we continue to focus on for years afterwards and said, many of us have immigration issues. Mr. Holder, can you address those? And in one of the most delightful ways I possibly can be a part of the law enforcement community, Eric Holder looked to the members of the families there and said, yes, Mr. SANTELLE will take care of all of that for you. And although at the time we all smiled, the chief of staff looked at me and said, "Oh, okay, a new assignment given to you that day." The reality is that somewhat humorous story in the midst of absolute tragedy is what you can and should expect of law enforcement. I was so very proud to spend with PARDEEP and many others many years, candidly, in addressing those collateral issues related to immigration status. And out of the 38 or 40 people who had those challenges at the time, we were able to figure out ways forward for almost all of them. And that service continues to this day. It continues also with respect to, I know Reverend Lauren talked about therapies, as has Reverend Bill. That too, providing victim support, witness support, survivor support. There's a wonderful group called the Community Relations Service. PARDEEP and I and others very much a part of that to this day. They are part of the Department of Justice. They will come to your community and work especially with those people who have been victimized, or the survivors of the particular event, whether it is perceived to you as being at the level of a shooting or something seemingly less important. The Community Relations Service of the Department of Justice, the victim support services inside U.S. attorneys' offices, that's what they're there for. And that is why they're appropriately called upon by you to be a part of the response, a necessary response of government. And the third point that I would make, the lesson I have learned is just this, and it is why I'm so very proud, as you can see, still emotional to continue to my association even after the Holder administration, the Obama administration is concluded, after my service is concluded. Continuity, that expectation of continuity among law enforcement to continue, as PARDEEP said, to be there, to show up unannounced, as I do. I don't say that to you out of any great sense of pride or expectation of commendation. I do it because it is a part of the humanity that should be vested in government and vested in all officials who are involved in responding to you. You have an expectation of not just communication about what happened, not just victim support, not just survivor support in all these various ways that can be provided, but also continuity after the media is gone, after the cameras are gone, for years after that, because we all know well, part of the lessons of tonight that Leah brings us together to discuss, these things do not go away overnight. They continue for years and years in ways that are known and seen, and ways that are unknown and unseen. And it is a part of my great commission, personal commitment, to continue to be focused with not only the Kaleka family, but all the other families there at the Oak Creek Gurdwara. There's another Gurdwara that it quite literally is in walking distance here in Brookfield of where I am right now. I've also become a part of that, an honorary part of that congregation too. And that continuity, that continued sustained engagement is, I think, necessarily what should also be a part of your expectation. And we can chat more about other things government can do. Once again, our strong commitment that you have an expectation of local law enforcement and all of its offices to respond with you, in partnership with you, in community with you to these kinds of incidents.
Wow. Oh, Mr. Santelle, that was incredible. I'm so glad that you are here to talk with us, to share what it was like for you. I think sometimes we tend to discount the humanity of those in law enforcement, and you sharing this is a very important thing. So thank you for opening up and being vulnerable with us and trusting us with what it was like for you. That means so much to us on this panel, to those who are listening, and I'm sure those who are going to watch in the future. Yes. We have a case study that is happening right now for a local pastor that I want to share with the group and get some responses on this. And so what happened was that a local pastor in this person's community has been spreading misinformation about trans folks, and rallied people with calls to action. And they sent members to harass people from churches who were at the Pride Fest, And then a protester showed up outside of this church sanctuary on Sunday mornings. And then this pastor named 7 of the open and affirming congregations on their TV broadcast, shared a screenshot from the church's website, did this while preaching about Jesus clearing the temple, and kicked over a table and was cracking a bullwhip while saying, but I'm not encouraging violence. So they have contacted their local police and state's attorney. And one suggestion they made was that the FBI Domestic Terrorism Task Group might be interested to follow them. But their primary concern is about potential violence against queer folk. And so this person is looking for some guidance. So far, their strategy has been to unite with the other open and affirming congregations, and actually to be more public and have a higher profile, and naming those behaviors and describing what their response has been. So this is happening right now for this congregation, and I know that they would this person would love to have some insight from this group. So anybody want to take an initial response to this? Bill, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah. So sunlight is the best disinfectant. I think what that sounds like to me is exactly what we did, getting all our allied folks together. As I said, power's in the relationship, but also power respects power. So I think that person is doing whatever they're doing is the right thing to do, because I think what you had said, Leah, is what they should be doing. Getting allies together, standing up to these bullies, because that's what they are, and they will cower once they realize that people are standing up to them.
Thank you, Bill. Others want to respond to that?
Leah, I will
go ahead, Jim.
On that
Yes, please, Jim.
Delighted to do so, and that is to make another recommendation. I know it's commonplace to think that, gosh, the federal government, they're in Washington, D.C., when we see the Attorney General, others say that they would not be interested in my situation. As I listen to you recount this horrific story, I think, and one of my recommendations is to reach out to the U.S. Department of Justice, because inside the Civil Rights Division, there are people commissioned, I'm very proud to say, initially under the Obama administration, continued under the Biden administration, who are there to react to this very kind of thing. They will come to your area. They will come to your community. Again, I mentioned already the Community Relations Service, which is a non-litigation portion of the Department of Justice. Invite them in. Tell them to come and put together, as PARDEEP and I did many years ago, continue to do. Bring the community in. If you need someone to convene a group, the Department of Justice will do that. Reach out to the Civil Rights Division, reach out to the Community Relations Service, reach out to your local U.S. attorney and say, we need your assistance in addressing this issue. What resources do you have? And again, they have an obligation to respond to you.
That's really helpful. So it's like, it's the exact opposite of what the terrorists want, which is for people to be intimidated and silent. So it's counterintuitive, but you actually need to not be ashamed or afraid to speak out about it and reach out for help.
Absolutely. And frankly, I never wore a uniform, but frankly, when representatives of the FBI and someone is introduced and they are appointed by the President of the United States of America to work on civil rights in this country, and they're in charge of all of the community relations services around the country, and they are here in your community, in a high school or in a church or in a synagogue or in a gurdwara, wherever, or a mosque, wherever you are, that sends the message that you are supported, and that those people who would seem to attack you and attempt to do things that are contrary to the interests of humanity, we will respond to you as well. And there is that deterrent message that does need to be sent. that the local folks are not alone. They have the support of law enforcement. They have the support of places called justice.
Mm, mm.
Just
Could
to-
I,
That's
could I say something?
inspiring. Yes, Pardeep, please.
I just want to just as far as like the local law enforcement community as well, provide connections. Obviously, we talked a little bit about trust, building trust within communities, but also connecting. And there's people at the federal level. If you're organizing something, they will come down, they will talk, they will have this conversation, and amplify it. Because each of these things, yes, it's a test. It's something that we don't want to see, but it's there, and it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity to say, hey, this is what our community stands for, and we're not going to just assume that it's going to be the message, but now we have to really prove it. And just bringing people together, and letting it see the light of day. Like, I don't know how you say it. Like, I think that sometimes people say, like, you may need to shame the devil. I don't like that shame, the shame the evil, right? Of like
Mhm.
whatever that hatred looks like. And shaming doesn't mean like we need to like embarrass them, but bringing it to light, as I think Reverend Bill said, like bring it to light, and shame, once it sees the light of day, right? It's usually like, okay, if I'm worried about something from I'm like, oh, I really hold some shame about this, but then I can release it. It's good. We have to release and say, okay, we have to understand this country has some pent up racism that is at the underbelly of it. It's got hatred. It's got whatever it has. But let's really now work on creating a better society for our children to grow up in.
That is really, really helpful. Reminder to our audience that if you have questions for our panel, you can either put that into the chat or into the Q&A. And while you're thinking of that, I know that Cathy has a follow-up question.
There we go. Apologize for that. This is for Bill and Pardeep. Anticipating what could happen. What are some things that we can do before putting an action plan in place? How to respond when threats do come, or doing something before something happens?
Well, I don't know. Do you, Pardeep, want to go first, or?
Sure. So I mean, like in real time right now, and this was so I think a lot of the good work that happened within, and I'm not trying to be political, but it is sometimes political, especially at the federal level. Um, a lot of the good work that was done by the Obama administration continues now. And some of the stuff that we know that needed to be implemented is starting to, we're building it right now for these prevention plans. It's happening at the state level, it's happening at the federal level, and then it's happening at the local level. Funding from the Biden administration, about a year and a half ago, there was an announcement that this is going to be intentional and that funding is going to happen at all of these different levels to prevent targeted violence against communities because of who they are, because of who they love, just because of their existence, right? And so there are really, I mean, there's great lessons, but I think you can proactively build trust within institutions. There's a reason why people are attempting to erode trust in journalism, in each other. It's a divide and conquer technique that has been used for a long time. But now we need to get to know each other. We need to say, okay, if somebody targeted, we're going to disagree on some things for sure, especially when we think about geopolitics, for sure. But we can center on that our local community should be safe. We can all have some agreement upon that. And so let's work from the anchoring of agreement to say, how does local law enforcement that traditionally has this distrust with this particular community build enough trust? And so there's conversations that need to happen. And usually within a local community, it's very effective to say, who are the key stakeholders in, let's say, the Sikh community? And it may not be a person with a title. It may be somebody like me that doesn't technically have a title in the Sikh community, but I can go and I can talk to people, I can influence people, right? So find out who the key stakeholders are, bring them together, have ongoing conversations of what are some of the difficulties, and then see who's missing, and then bring them together and see how the demographic is changing. And if somebody's not represented, well, we need to work on making sure that they're also there, and they can let us know about what is happening within their community. And then usually local law enforcement and other folks, they're I'm former law enforcement. I served for about 5 years in Milwaukee Police Department. I will say I do have a trust of, I get that there is a history, that history needs to be addressed, but within the dynamics of, I see most of the time local law enforcement will respond, even if it's not a prosecutable thing. Let's say a group is terrorizing the town, and they're hanging out at a particular bar. Well, police officers can usually make themselves present at that bar, right? Or they can say, hey, you know what, knock it off. Or you can do all those things, but we have to like let that be known that that's it's happening. The local small minority communities have to also step up and say, hey, this is happening at my local shop. People are kind of coming in and they're vandalizing it, or they're calling me some particular name, and we're getting better at that. We definitely have a long way to go to say, hey, like, you know what, you can trust that they'll do something about this.
Pardeep, that's really helpful. The idea of bringing people together, making sure that the key constituencies and the stakeholders are there, are present, are represented. That is something that I think that can really build those networks so that, God forbid, something does happen, there is a matrix that can respond to this in a really robust way.
Just one last thing
Well,
too, and really even also not just reporting hate crimes, but hate incidents. And so if those incidents start to show up and you start to have mapping of like, hey, it's happening over right in this area right here, in this particular part of Wisconsin. Okay, well, what's going on in that particular area? So there, and the best part of it is that there's funding for this to happen. Nonprofits can be doing this work as you kind of go forward, and we can scale this, and we can create prevention plans and protocols.
So
So can I
this brings up
respond?
yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Bill, please.
Yeah, so, I appreciate all that, but, at the last roundtable we had, our chief of police said, I'm here to listen to you. And this was about LGBT, and not only LGBT, but every community that is not white, that isn't they're all being attacked by white nationalism. And so our chief of police was sitting there, and he said, well, I'm listening to you. And the whole time he was texting, he wasn't listening. And, I think that's one of the factors, at least, for my community. I'm gay. I represent the LGBTQIA community. And, it's such a mixed bag here in Fresno because, even with our attacks, it seemed like the police were more sympathetic to the Proud Boys than they were to us. And the one agency that we have come to rely on is the FBI, because they have proven themselves, to be looking for whoever did the damage that they did. So, and I know a lot of people who are out there listening to me right now, they know that their law enforcement agencies are probably, well, I think even Reverend Lauren had told me previously that the one guy who is a oath keeper is also on the sheriff's department there in Colorado. So, they're there. And so what do? You have to be able to hold those people accountable because they're in law enforcement. Now, she can correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember that. And so,
Yeah.
It's a real mixed bag, especially in my community here in Fresno. They do not trust the police department here at all, but they do trust the FBI. They do trust the federal, they do trust the state, but not the local, because the local is so much influenced, especially our sheriff's department, by this right-wing wacko Trumpist MAGA whatever. That's the reality.
And that's a really important perspective that we needed to address. I'm wondering, Jim, if you can speak to that. I know you're not at local level, but what can somebody do if they're encountering this within their own police department?
Absolutely. And so this is regrettably not unknown in America. And Pardeep and I and others had this great opportunity, of course, in Oak Creek. We had just the opposite experience. On the day of the shooting, quite literally, Pardeep will tell you the same thing. We had law enforcement from northern Illinois, from northern Wisconsin, literally getting in their cars and coming to Oak Creek just to say, I can help. That is not the experience of everyone around this country, including Reverend Bill, your community. And so what do? Well, the answer is, once again, you reach out, you go online and find the name for your local U.S. attorney who is responsible for being the Department of Justice. Call that number. And so you want to speak to the civil rights attorney. You want to speak to the victim witness coordinator. You want to engage at that level. Call the local FBI. They have intake people there for that very purpose to say, if you have not gotten a good response from your local police, even state police, the FBI are there. And just to add another important footnote to what Pardeep said and also Bill said, if you think that the FBI is not interested in what you have to say, you're mistaken. Because if you call them and say, this modest thing happened to me in my community, chances are the FBI already knows things about those people who've done those things because they're looking at this from a national scale. Remember that the very people, Reverend Bill, that you were talking about, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, it's the U.S. Department of Justice that has prosecuted them successfully, admittedly, in a different setting for the January 6th event. Those people are going away to jail for 20 years and more for that kind of thing. How does that happen? It's because the FBI, well, attorneys, U.S. attorneys' offices are identifying those people as a threat, and they're making the ties around the country. Not Bill, just in your community, not Lauren, just in your community, not Pardeep, and obviously in local here in Wisconsin, Cathy, all of you, Leah, Lavinia, all of you, they've got those connections nationally, and they will see ties that you do not know about, and they can respond even more thoughtfully than you might think. And so again, important to simply get those phone numbers and reach out. Stop into the office. I'm a big fan of showing up in person and saying, I am here, I'm a constituent, and I need some support, I need some direction. Another little footnote, and then I promise, lawyers talk way too much, right? The other thing I would offer, again, the good programs that Pardeep made mention of in the Biden administration, if you have concerns even about the security of your place of worship, did this at the Gurdwaras under Pardeep's good direction. If you've got concern about the windows, the parking lots, the fellowship halls, the naves, those kinds of things, there is a great deal of funding, financial funding, not only to do assessments of your own security situation. There are programs that ensure that the community, the congregations themselves have the mechanisms for accessing those funds, and they're available again through the Department of Justice, through Homeland Security. Make reference to those, use those monies. They are there, admittedly, to protect you, to do the security portion of it, which is the bricks and mortar portion of it. But it's also important to recognize that too is a way of sending the message that you will not tolerate this kind of behavior. And any attempts to affect Reverend Lauren and Reverend Bill and Pardeep and Lavinia and Cathy and Leah and everyone else who's participating here. I see a part of our program tonight is a good friend of mine right down the street, David Kramer from the Unitarian Universal Congregation. We had a recent event there. We talk about the circumstances of that facility too, that need to be secure for the purpose of worship and for the purpose of congregation community. Those resources are out there for you. As Pardeep said, make use of them.
And can I respond again?
Yes.
So when the initial attack happened to us, I did reach out to the FBI and there was no call. The only reason that I was able to get hold of the FBI, and they've been great since, but it was through two lawyers and I think it was the Urban Renewal League that we got hold of, and they called Washington, D.C., because none of my calls to the FBI were being responded to. And so it took other people other than me reaching out to them, people with a little bit more credentials, I guess, than I have, that finally the FBI did respond to me. So, you know, I know, Jim, that sounds really good, but I'm sure there are a lot of pastors, especially listening out here, that if they call an FBI office, they may not get responded to, just like what happened to us. And, you know, it took me two lawyers, well, actually three lawyers, and somebody who had a connection in Washington, D.C. to finally get the Fresno office of the FBI to respond to us.
Do not give up. And again, big fan, of course, not surprisingly, of the United States Attorney's Office. Every single one of you in this call tonight is served by a United States Attorney appointed by a fellow named President Joseph Biden. They are in service to you. Call them as well if you do not get a response from other law enforcement.
I'll just give you just a short little, I'll make this really cool real quick. There was an incident, and some of these incidents happen and you don't even hear about them. But I was out of town. I get a call from the Brookfield GRUBAUGH, and somebody said, hey, there's a guy outside. He's wearing Campbell shorts, and he's suspicious. He's asking us about worship times and this thing, that thing. What do you want us to do? Just don't let him in. Don't let him inside the building. Just take a picture, show me the security camera. What does he look like? Right. So because we had some of these proactive relationships, right, I was calling around and I'm like, hey, there's somebody out there. Can you get a squad over there like right away? By the time they got the squad over there, so I called the masjid, which was down in Brookfield, and I'm like, hey, be on the lookout, make sure the doors are locked, secure the entries, make sure people are inside. But there's somebody here's their description. And sure enough, he went over there. The police followed up with whatever they follow up with. So what we're saying is just don't give up, because the consequences of you kind of saying, I've had a bad experience, or I have bad experiences, or people don't like the consequence. I do not want to see a community be harmed. And I know that sometimes I don't want to invalidate anybody's feelings about law enforcement. I think you're exactly right. But I also want to make sure that we also are checking in on our own biases and our own understanding, and get somebody else to kind of figure that out. Because the last thing I want to see is somebody with an AR showing up to a church. And this is me being just honest and real, right? So this is like somebody showing up and intimidating people outside, or somebody that also maybe has some mental health difficulties, who is, unhinged. So please just be careful.
Thank you, PARDEEP. Thank you, Jim. And thank you, Bill, for that very important exchange. I want to take a step back, because we have some folks who are not quite sure if hateful remarks here and there, what really constitutes a serious threat. Because, you don't want to get people in your congregation all riled up. You don't want to instill fear or cause unnecessary anxiety. So, and Reverend Lauren GRUBAUGH was, said, this page has been up about me for years. And so I didn't, it wasn't an immediate urgent thing. So how do you know? When do you, what's the line? What is it that should constitute, I need to take a step and do all of these things that you have said, or let me just monitor and see where it goes?
So I have 63 voicemails on our phone system at the church that I'm required to keep until the FBI tells me I can't. The police and the FBI have listened to all of them, and many of them are the typical fake church, fake pastor. You people accept these people, you are disgusting, all that. But There were 6 of them that, according to both the police and the FBI, crossed the line. And they were actual threats saying, if you do this event, there will be damage done. There will be, you will pay a price. And those are the ones that the FBI have focused on. See, we get these all the time. It's fake church, fake pastor, agents of Satan, agents of this or whatever, but yeah, you don't want to listen to them, but then when you hear those ones saying, and you will pay for this, well, then even the police, that's, when they listened to them, they said, these ones cross the line. So, I'm sorry, people get
so when it rises to the level of actual threat,
right,
as opposed to harassing, is what you're saying.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we get harassed all the time, but the threats, those are the ones exactly, Leah. Where
Jim, would you concur with that or have any other thoughts to add?
I would, and then I also bring to it, of course, the prosecutor's standpoint, which is, yes, there are many things that are not hate crimes that are prosecutable. That's absolutely right. Bill has accurately codified that. At the same time, to respond to your very good question, Leah, I would say that the bar, from my perspective, is very low in terms of responding. And so, yes, those many voicemail messages that Reverend Bill has received, even though it is burdensome sometimes and you may get tired of responding, they need to be communicated to local law enforcement, if not there, to state law enforcement, to federal law enforcement, because once again, they may know things that you do not. And this may be a part of a larger program that they're pursuing to deter that conduct and to send messages out there. And the other component of this, which animates that answer, is that even though not everything is prosecutable, people forget that there is no right in this country that is unconditional. There's nothing in the Constitution, no right in the Bill of Rights that is not without its restrictions and limitations, and that includes the right to free speech and to assembly and to all the other things that are set forth by James Madison in the First Amendment. That right does not include the right to make threats. It does not include the right to obstruct your parking lots, to obstruct and engage in assemblies on your front lawns of the places where you worship. All those things can be responded to by law enforcement. Again, because when people say, I've got a First Amendment right to be there, the answer is no, you do not. So for people to understand that there is no right in America that is unconditional, including that right. Again, my good friend David Kramer and I talked about this recently at an event. You have a right to protest on public areas. You do not have a right to obstruct people coming into a mosque, coming into Gurdwara. You do not have a right to ask them as they're coming and going, or to make other outreach of the kind that we're discussing tonight, that Reverend Lauren described, that Bill described, that others have described. That is a limited right. Law enforcement also has an obligation to respond to those things, again, from my perspective, at a quite low bar.
Wow, those criteria are really helpful. Yes, Pardeep, and then we're going to have to close out with final thoughts from everybody.
So, a lot of the work that we do, we work with people who are or who were going to commit violence. This kind of brought to mind a 16-year-old kid who was going to shoot up a church, but was apprehended by a very attuned police officer. He was charged. He got mental health treatment. He was so. With that said, I think just to reinforce what Jim just said, the bar should be very, very low, and you should be very attuned to seeing any kind of suspicious behavior. If somebody is coming in and we want to be welcoming, we want to say, okay, like come into our church, right? We don't want to lock the doors, but like if somebody's coming in with a backpack, right, and they don't really look like they are, like you could tell by their facial, like just everything, just be cautious, have some protocols for everyone that kind of says, okay, if we have ushers at the door and we don't, we're not trying to discriminate against you particularly, but we just want to make sure that we speak to everyone who is a new congregant that comes in, right? Somehow, some way develop a protocol that can somehow mitigate some of that threat, because you have to be very attuned this day and age to people just coming in and say, well, if you're all inclusive and welcoming, why not let me in? It's never mind this backpack that I got on. Never mind, I'm just gonna sit in the back of the church the entire time, grimacing and being upset. Right? Like those start to like set off spidey senses, but I think just the bar is very low. If somebody's making those threats, a lot of times we think about this within, if somebody's making those threats, and a lot of times they're not going to act on those. It's the person that's silent, that is going, but as Jim pointed out, the FBI may also have some intelligence on them, and they're putting all of that together, and they just need you speaking up and saying, hey, did this person come in? What time did they come in? How long did they stick around? What time did they leave? Did you get a license plate? Be very attuned to all that.
Just such good practical advice. Listen, this has been so incredibly helpful. I cannot express my gratitude enough to all of you for sharing what you have. I'm going to be, when this video is ready, we're going to put it out far and wide. I'm going to put it into an article that will share all of this in other platforms. But I want to thank our panelists tonight. I would like to thank James SANTELLE, PARDEEP KALEKA, Reverend Lauren GRUBAUGH Thomas, and Reverend Bill KNEZOVICH for the incredible wisdom, the courage. You're all doing the work, and we are grateful for the insights, the wisdom, the practical suggestions that each of you have shared with us this evening. I'm going to ask my co-moderator, Cathy Christmon, to please close us with prayer.
Let's pray. Living and loving God, Creator, Mother, Father, Life Giver, we praise you and ask just your blessings upon us as we go and do this hard, good, faithful work. Grant us wisdom, grant us courage, grant us strength, God, to just trust our gut. Something's not right, God. We are confident, God, that we have the resources that we need to respond faithfully and so that our people are safe. God, that your people are safe. We ask and pray, God, that we just keep us all on the path that you would have us go. We pray now in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Cathy. Thanks to the Wisconsin Council of Churches for co-hosting us for this event that with the Clergy Emergency League. If you are a pastor and you would like to learn more about our work, you can find us on the web, clergyemergencyleague.org. And thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful and blessed evening.